I want to tell you a story that still makes me smile every single time I think about it. You see, most people believe homeowners associations, HOAs, are there to protect property values and make neighborhoods better. But if you've ever lived under one, you know the ugly truth. They're like mini dictatorships, run by power-hungry neighbors who think they control every inch of your life. And me, I was their target. The HOA in my neighborhood tried to force me into selling my home cheap. They thought they could bully me, fine me, and harass me into giving up what I worked my whole life for. But they didn't realize I had one thing they couldn't take away: patience and a plan. What they didn't see coming was this. Instead of caving in, I sold my house to a developer. And do you want to know the very first thing that developer did? They tore down the HOA's precious clubhouse. Their pride and joy, the building they loved more than their own families, was reduced to rubble. And I got to watch it all happen. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began. It started like any other morning. I had just made myself a cup of coffee, stepped out on my porch, and looked over the neighborhood I had lived in for nearly 15 years. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. A comfortable home, a yard where my kids used to play, and a little garden out back where I grew vegetables and flowers. To me, it was more than just a house. It was memories. It was stability. It was home. But to the HOA, my home was something else entirely. To them, it was a problem. They had plans, big plans for the neighborhood. They wanted to renovate the clubhouse, expand the parking, and turn our little quiet street into something marketable to wealthier buyers. And my property, it was sitting right in the middle of their dream. At first, it was subtle. A notice in the mailbox about violations. My grass was supposedly too long. My trash bins were visible from the street. My mailbox wasn't painted the approved color. Stupid, petty stuff. I laughed it off at first. Everyone got these silly notices once in a while, right? But then the fines started piling up. $50 here, $100 there. I was working hard, paying my mortgage, and suddenly these parasites were draining me for things that didn't matter. When I showed up to an HOA meeting to ask why I was being singled out, the board members barely looked at me. They sat up there, smug and dismissive, like little kings and queens ruling over their toy kingdom. That's when I realized they weren't just trying to correct me. They were trying to push me out. I remember the first time they hinted at what they really wanted. It was after weeks of constant harassment violation letters, fines, and even warnings taped to my door like I was some sort of criminal. I was already fed up, but then one of the HOA board members, a man named Richard, stopped by unannounced. Richard was the kind of neighbor who wore a polo shirt tucked into khaki shorts every single day. The type who smiled with his mouth, but not his eyes. He stood on my porch with his clipboard, pretending to be friendly. "Look," he said, "we've noticed your properties. Well, it's not really fitting in with the future of this neighborhood. But there's a way we can all benefit. If you're willing to sell, the HOA could make it worth your while." I asked him what he meant. He cleared his throat, glanced around like he was telling me some secret deal, and then said it. "We'd buy your house." Of course it wouldn't be market value, more of a fair relocation price. But it would save you all the stress of these violations. I stood there, stunned. This wasn't about grass or trash cans or mailboxes. This was their plan all along. They wanted my property. They wanted it cheap, and they thought by drowning me in fines and notices, they'd wear me down until I handed it over. I told him no, firm and clear. "This is my home, Richard. I'm not selling to you. End of story." But of course, with people like that, it was never the end of the story. The very next week, my mailbox was flooded again. More violations, more fines. Out my driveway. supposedly had a crack that needed immediate repair. My roof shingles weren't the approved shade of brown. They even fined me because I had a small garden trellis in the backyard that wasn't approved by the design committee. It was ridiculous. Every day, it felt like they were inventing new ways to make my life harder. Neighbors I used to be friendly with suddenly stopped waving. Some avoided me completely. Others whispered that I was the troublemaker, the guy who was bringing down the neighborhood. I could feel the weight of the board's influence pressing down on me. They wanted me isolated. They wanted me desperate. But here's the thing about me, don't break easy. If anything, their pressure just made me more determined. The harassment went on for months. They even tried embarrassing me at community meetings, reading off my so-called violations in front of everyone, acting like I was some irresponsible homeowner. I kept my cool. I let them think their plan was working. What they didn't know was that I had already started thinking of my own plan. If they wanted me out so badly, fine, I'd go. But not on their terms. Not for their relocation price. I wasn't going to let them win. I was going to make sure that when I left a scar so deep in their precious HOA that they'd never recover. And the first step of that plan? Finding someone who could turn my property into their worst nightmare. The more I resisted, the harder they pushed. It was almost like a game to them, except the stakes were my sanity and my home. Letters kept coming. Fines stacked up. At one point, they even claimed my fence was 2 inches higher than regulation. 2 inches. Can you believe that? It got so ridiculous that I started keeping a folder of every notice they sent me. It was getting thicker by the week, like a scrapbook of harassment. Then things took a darker turn. One morning, I woke up to find a bright orange paper stuck to my front door. At first, I thought it was another violation notice, but this one was different. It was a formal warning saying that if I didn't resolve my violations and comply with community standards, the HOA could take legal action. They even hinted at the possibility of putting a lien on my property. That's when it hit me. They weren't just trying to scare me. They were building a case, a paper trail, something they could eventually use to force me into selling for cheap. At that point, I knew I needed to be smart. I couldn't just react emotionally. I had to think long-term. And that's when an idea came to me. If they wanted my property so badly, fine. They could have it, but not the way they imagined. I started making quiet calls. A friend of mine worked in real estate development. We hadn't talked in years, but I knew he was connected with developers who were always looking for land in suburban areas. I explained my situation, careful not to let too much slip. And he immediately got interested. Your property backs right up to the clubhouse, right? He asked me. Yeah, I said slowly, realizing he already understood the potential better than I did. Then you're sitting on leverage. Developers love parcels that give them access to more space. You're basically the keystone. Sell it to the right person, and you could flip the entire balance of power in that neighborhood. That one conversation changed everything. Meanwhile, the HOA kept turning up the heat. They started sending letters not just to me, but also to the neighbors around me, saying my property was a blight on the community. At one meeting, Richard stood up and flat out said, if he doesn't sell, he'll drag all of us down. People started glaring at me in the grocery store. One woman I had known for 10 years even crossed the street to avoid me. The HOA was poisoning my reputation, turning friends into enemies. And all the while, I played it cool, smiled at Richard, nodded politely at the board, pretended like I was buckling under their pressure. But behind the scenes, I was negotiating with a developer who saw my property not as a burden, but as an opportunity. The HOA thought they were tightening the noose. They had no idea I was holding the knife that could cut the rope hand, maybe even turn it back around their necks. The first real meeting with the developer felt like destiny. We sat down at a quiet coffee shop across town. far enough from the neighborhood that no familiar faces would spot us. He was a sharp guy, mid-40s, confident, the type of man who could walk into a room and already know how the deal would end before anyone spoke. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were mock-up plans, zoning maps, and estimates of what could be done with my property and the land surrounding it. "You're in the perfect spot," he told me. "Your lot gives access to the clubhouse side. Without it, the HOA owns a dead corner. With it, I can change everything." I leaned back, sipping my coffee, pretending to be casual. But inside, I was electrified. "How much are we talking?" I asked. He gave me a number that made my jaw almost drop. 'Twas easily double what the HOA had hinted at, and even above what I thought my house was worth. This wasn't a relocation price. This was life-changing money, but it wasn't just about the money. It was about what came after. "Now," he continued, lowering his voice, "if I buy this property, I'll be making some changes the HOA won't like. In fact, their precious clubhouse might not survive. Is that going to be a problem for you?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "That's exactly why I called you." We shook hands. The deal wasn't final yet, but we both knew it was going to happen. Meanwhile, the HOA's harassment only grew nastier. They started sending me notices almost daily. They claimed my garden was overgrown, even though I'd just trimmed it. They fined me because my kids had left their bikes near the side of the house. They even sent a letter saying my curtains were not consistent with neighborhood aesthetics. Curtains. Can you believe that? And then came the breaking point. Richard and 2 other board members showed up at my door again. This time, they weren't pretending to be friendly. "We're done playing games," Richard said, crossing his arms. "You're out of compliance on nearly every front. We've given you plenty of chances, and the board has voted. You either sell to us now at our offer, or we'll pursue legal action. You could lose everything." I looked at them, keeping my face as calm as stone. "Everything?" I asked. "Or just the clubhouse you love so much?" Richard frowned, clearly confused. He didn't know what I meant, and I wasn't about to explain. I just let that thought hang in the air while I closed the door on them. Inside, I could barely hold back my grin. The papers were already in motion. My developer friend had a legal team drawing up contracts. Within a matter of weeks, my house wouldn't belong to me or the HOA anymore. It would belong to someone who didn't bow to their ridiculous rules. And when that day came, I promised myself I'd be sitting front row to watch the look on their faces. The day the sale closed, I felt like 100 pounds had been lifted off my shoulders. After months of harassment, fines, and intimidation, I finally held the signed contract in my hands. My property no longer belonged to MIT, belonged to the developer. The same house they tried to force me to sell cheap had just made me more money than I'd ever dreamed. But the money wasn't even the best part. The best part was knowing what came next. The HOA had no idea. They thought they'd cornered me, that I'd eventually give in to their bullying. They never imagined I'd make a move that would flip the entire neighborhood upside down. I didn't say a word to anyone. Not to neighbors, not to the board. I packed quietly, smiling to myself as the HOA continued to send their violation notices. It was almost funny at that point, letters accusing me of noncompliance. Fines stacking up when technically, I didn't even own the place anymore. I forwarded every notice to the developer's legal team, and they assured me they'd handle it. Backed my last night in that house was bittersweet. I walked through each room, remembering the years I'd spent there. My kids' laughter echoing in the hallways. The nights spent fixing up the garden. The mornings with coffee on the porch. I had built a life there, and while the HOA had tried to sour it, those memories were mine forever. When I finally closed the door behind me, I wasn't leaving defeated. I was leaving victorious, and the next chapter Well, that belonged to the HOA. It didn't take long for the first signs of trouble to hit them. A week after the sale, large trucks began pulling into the neighborhood. Surveyors walked the property with clipboards and laser scanners. Neighbors whispered, confused, peeking out of their windows. Richard and the board looked uneasy, but they told people not to worry. It was routine maintenance or landscaping. Upgrades. But then the construction fencing went up. Bright orange mesh surrounded the entire lot, stretching all the way to the clubhouse's property line. The signs read, "Future Development Site." That's when the panic started. I wasn't there to see it firsthand, but friends kept me updated. They said Richard called an emergency HOA meeting, his face red with rage. He demanded answers, but there was nothing he could do. The land was privately owned now, and the developer had full legal rights. Neighbors started questioning the board. "Did you know about this?" they asked. "Why didn't you stop it? What's going on?" The smug confidence the HOA once had was cracking. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The bulldozers arrived. Early one morning, engines roared to life. A crowd of neighbors gathered, watching as the machines tore into the soil. Out. The clubhouse pride of the HOA, their little kingdom, sat directly in the line of fire. The developer had decided it was in the way of the new commercial space they were building. So down it came, piece by piece. Brick by brick, the clubhouse was reduced to rubble. The same building where Richard and his board had humiliated me, where they'd read my violations out loud like I was some kind of criminal. That building was nothing but dust, and I was there. Oh, you better believe I was there. I stood on the sidewalk across the street, coffee in hand, watching as the walls crumbled. Richard and the other board members were frantic, running around, shouting at the workers. But the workers didn't care. They had permits. They had contracts. They had orders. The HOA was powerless. Some neighbors cried. Others yelled. Richard screamed something about lawsuits, but everyone knew it was hopeless. The developer had bought the property fair and square. The clubhouse was gone, and there was nothing the HOA could do. I can't describe the satisfaction I felt watching that scene. It wasn't just revenge, was justice. For every fine, every threat, every sleepless night they caused me, this was payback in the purest form. The fallout was brutal. With no clubhouse, the HOA lost its meeting place. They had no hub for their operations, no center of power. Their prestige was shattered. Home values dropped, and angry homeowners turned on the board, demanding resignations. Richard tried to hold on to his position, but within a few months, he was forced out. The HOA's power crumbled just like their clubhouse had, and me. I was already long gone, living in a new home far away from their reach. Every now and then, I drive past the old neighborhood just to see the progress. The developer is putting up a modern commercial space, shops, offices, things that will bring in real revenue. Ironically, it will probably raise property values higher than the HOA ever could. But their control, their stranglehold on the neighborhood, is gone forever. I sold my house for more than I ever expected. I got the last laugh, and the HOA. They're left with nothing but memories of a clubhouse that will never come back. So if you've ever been bullied by an HOA, remember this sometimes. The best revenge isn't fighting them head on. Sometimes the best revenge is letting them think they've won, and then pulling the rug right out from under them. Because in the end, bullies like that always forget one thing: power built on fear never lasts. And I made sure they learned that lesson the hard way. And that's how the HOA that tried to bully me out of my home ended up losing the very heart of their community at the clubhouse they worshipped. They thought they were unbeatable, that their rules and fines made them untouchable. But in the end, their arrogance destroyed them, walking away with a fair deal and watching their empire crumble wasn't just revenge, was freedom. So next time someone tells you an HOA can control everything, remember this story. Remember that power is only as strong as the people who give in to it. And sometimes, all it takes is one person saying no to bring the whole system down. Thank you for watching To My Story. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life tales of justice, karma, and revenge. Until next time, stand tall, fight back, and never let anyone bully you out of what's yours.